Oh, okay. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining this side event on the shipbreaking issue, which is an issue that hasn't been spoken about for a while here at the Basel context, but we'll give you all the good reasons why it needs to be on the agenda, and there needs to be continued work with the parties on improving the practices of scrapping end-of-life vessels. So today I'll be speaking, my colleague Ekin Sakin will be speaking, and we have David Azulay from the Center of International Environmental Law, senior attorney, who will be talking about how the Basel Convention needs to continue to play a role in order for ship recycling to become a cleaner and safer industry. On the agenda today, we'll talk about the current situation at the shipbreaking yards. Ekin will dive more in detail in the requirements for environmentally sound management and look at the current practices today. I'll be talking more about what's happened since the issue was last on the agenda of the Basel parties, so recent case law, also legislative developments, especially at the EU level, and then David will place all this debate in the upcoming international discussions when the IMO's Hong Kong Convention enters into force in 2025. And what that means for Basel and what that means for the Basel parties. And then I'll have some small concluding words and an outlook. So I'll be talking about the global trade of toxic ships and the role of the Basel Convention. And this picture is from 2020 behind. So you can obviously see that there still is a role and there still is need for improving the conditions at the shipbreaking yards. And this is indeed an issue of externalizing costs. I mean, as the NGO Shipbreaking Platform, we're a coalition of environmental and human rights NGOs. One of the tasks that we do is map and track all vessels scrapped globally every year. We publish this on our website, where they ended up, who sold them, how they got there, what flag the vessels had, etc. This data you can find in an Excel sheet on our website. And it looks something like this. The big blue dots are where the vessels are coming from, and the small orange dots are where most of them end up. So as you can see, the global fleet is being dismantled on only 3 beaches in South Asia, one region of the world. So it's actually a regional crisis, a global industry causing harm in one part of the world and only on 3 beaches. There are accidents, we track these accidents, but we only get the top, we don't get the full picture because there is still a lack of transparency in the sector. But this is what it looks like, and these are pictures from Bangladesh 2020. There are still accidents, there is pollution, There is pollution at the yards, in the ocean, where the vessels are scrapped, the intertidal zone, but also adjacent to the facilities. So, I mean, there will be monsoon seasons, flooding, oils going into residential areas, the living quarters behind. And we published a report last year together with Human Rights Watch, really looking at the situation in Bangladesh and the situation of the workers and workers' rights and breaches that are happening. The report also outlines how the business is conducted, so which parties are involved, how they are circumventing the Basel Convention in order to continue to scrap their vessels on the beaches of Bangladesh. And you can find that report on our website. Another place where ships are scrapped is India, and just here to focus a bit on India. I mean, the pollution has been clearly documented, both in reports of the European Union, who have been in Alang and audited the facilities, but also in environmental impact assessments issued in India. And as you can see, there is pollution in the air, sea, and soil, and levels that are way above permitted national and international standards. India ranked lowest in the Environmental Performance Index, which kind of signals that there is a problem in India on enforcing environmental legislation. It does not necessarily mean that it doesn't exist in India, but there is a problem in actually enforcing it. And we've seen the Modi government also cracking down on civil society, critical civil society voices and media, and opposition to that also being signaled here in an editorial in The Hindu, where it was clearly stated that the right to protect the environment through the courts needs to be maintained. But we should be aware that there are challenges in India in terms of ensuring the proper management of hazardous materials. And remember that the Basel Convention was created to deal with these types of situations and protect developing countries from the dumping of hazardous wastes. We also wrote a report on the conditions in Aliaga in Turkey, which is another ship recycling destination. Ekin is the author of that report. You can also find it on our website. And we identified also there that there are several problems related to the shipbreaking sector. They are structural in terms of environmental legislation not being properly implemented, the sector being exempted from having to conduct an environmental impact assessment, the sector being exempted from environmental licensing procedures. But we also identified that there are huge problems related to detecting occupational diseases, that there are problems in terms of properly managing hazardous waste downstream, that there is not proper wastewater management or oil separators in Aliaga. All these issues are outlined in the report, so it's not only in South Asia where there are problems related to the scrapping of end-of-life vessels, but also in Turkey. And this is what it looks like in Turkey. And as you can see, there is oil that is seeping away from the assets that are laying at the yard. So there are many harmful externalities related to shipbreaking. I've listed here some of them. There are many more. And these were the externalities that the Basel Convention was designed to counter. It is well known that pollution and labor abuses will follow the path of least resistance and will seek the opportunity, cost externalization. The shipping sector will seek to avoid the costs that are related to safe and environmentally sound ship recycling. And I think it's really important to know that ship owners and the shipping industry knows what it looks like at the shipbreaking yards. It's been on their agenda for many years. It's been on the Basel Party's agenda for many years. It's been in major media outlets. It's been in documentaries. It's been in reports. And we've issued several reports on the issue. So ship owners know. So I think that's really key takeaway. This is not a secret. And the issue has also been dealt with in another institution, which is the International Maritime Organization. They have adopted the Hong Kong Convention in 2009. Basel parties were asked at the Cartagena COP 10 to look at the Hong Kong Convention, establish whether it provided an equivalent level of control to the Basel Convention. There was no decision on that. There was no agreement that it provided an equivalent level of control. And after its adoption in 2009, it has now received enough ratifications, so it will be entering into force in June 2025. And the issue of how the Basel Convention and the Hong Kong Convention can work together, have to work together, will need to be dealt with here at the Basel Convention and also at the IMO. But we have been very critical to the Hong Kong Convention because we believe it sets extremely low standards for ship recycling. It allows beaching. It gives responsibility for enforcement on flag states, end-of-life vessels, sail under typical end-of-life flags such as Tuvalu, Comoros, Palau, known for poorly implementing maritime legislation. There is a long list of weaknesses and outlining the low standard that the Hong Kong Convention currently sets, or set in 2009, because the text has not changed since then. And we've outlined why we believe that it will not change the current situation. And one thing that has allowed us to confirm that is that since 2009, we've seen facilities in South Asia obtain what they've called statements of compliance with the Hong Kong Convention. So it's 8 organizations that have gone and issued these statements to facilities in South Asia saying that they actually comply with the Hong Kong Convention. We've been critical to these statements as well. I mean, they're issued on a B2B basis because the convention has not yet entered into force, but we've seen that it is a box-ticking exercise. It's based on very weak standards. It doesn't look at downstream waste management because the Hong Kong Convention does not look at downstream waste management. And today we have more than 100 facilities in South Asia that have statements of compliance with the Hong Kong Convention, and will probably have maintain those statements upon entry into force of the Hong Kong Convention. And this is what they look like. So this is one of the first facilities that received a statement of compliance with the Hong Kong Convention in India. Danish investigative journalists went to see that facility in 2016, so right after they had received the statement of compliance. And this is what they found. They found inappropriate protective equipment. They found dangerous situations using gas. They found no hospital. They found poor living quarters. They found wastes being dumped. This is what a Hong Kong compliant facility looks like. This is another Hong Kong compliant facility. So just to quickly wrap up on the introduction of why Basel needs to maintain its discussions and competency on end-of-life vessels. Ekin will talk more about environmentally sound management later on, but just to remind of the decisions that have been taken at the Basel level, that a ship is a hazardous waste, that Basel parties have an obligation to implement the Basel Convention for end-of-life vessels, and that Basel parties should continue to support Basel should continue to support Basel parties in implementing the Basel Convention on ship recycling. David will talk more about the role of the Basel Convention in light of the entry into force of the Hong Kong Convention later on. But yes, ships are toxic. They contain many materials that are listed in Annex 1 of the Basel Convention. Here are some figures from 2009, or 2010, which were issued by the World Bank that looked at the amounts of hazardous materials that are estimated to end up in the different locations if business continues as usual. There are many hazardous materials embedded in the structure of the ship, and there are many of these materials that become even more dangerous if they're not properly managed during the cutting operations. So with that, I'll give the floor to my colleague, Ekin, who will talk more about the Basel guidelines on environmentally sound management and look at some of the practices at the yards in South Asia and Turkey.
Thanks very much, Ingvild. And hello, everyone. I'm Ekin, and I work as a policy officer at NGO Shipbreaking platform. In this part of our side event, I will share with you the current practices in ship recycling activities, and I will compare them with the recommendations shared in Basel technical guidelines. So just to give an overview to the technical guidelines, the full name of it is the Environmentally Sound Management of Dismantling of Ships, and it was published in 2002. The main intention of the technical guidelines was to provide advice and guidance to ship recycling countries and ship recycling yards to have good practice in environmentally sound management during their operations, since the Basel Convention obliged parties to have environmentally sound management. So the technical guidelines provided advice on environmental verification and monitoring to the yards. And to do that, basically, it shared clear standards and procedures to have environmental management plan and risk assessments. As I shared, the guideline was published in 2002, and during that time, the technical guidelines provided a stepwise improvement approach, and it listed several operational aspects of the facilities to develop in a stepwise approach, and those operational aspects need to be met within 1 year, 5 year, and or 10 year. So I will share two aspects of those listed operational aspects. One of them is the complete containment, and I will share it with its link with spill prevention and water waste treatment. And secondly, I will share just shortly about downstream waste management. So to start with complete containment, it is one of the most important environmental design of a ship recycling yard to prevent releasing contaminants to the environment and also to prevent spills. And Basel technical guidelines advise that complete containment need to be ensured for all ship recycling activities from beginning till the end. And it needs to also have impermeable flooring with drainage system. And it was also recommended that those aspects need to be developed within 10 years to met with environmentally sound management in the facilities. But we don't see that aspect in the current practices. And this is the conceptual illustration of a model shipbreaking yard, also from the technical guidelines. And the gray area is basically, as you can see, the dismantling area. And all the activities are in a complete contained area, including the primary block cutting. But this is one of an example from India from last year. And as Ingvild shared, most of the global tonnage, around 60% of the global tonnage, is being dismantled on tidal mudflats with the beaching technique. And here in the beaching technique, basically the primary block cutting is happening on the beach, so that all the heavy metals, paints, debris, dust is going to do sediments and sea. So it's a continuous pollution for the environment because it's very challenging to prevent releases. And here you see a satellite picture just from a couple of weeks ago, and you see basically the ships are beach on the intertidal zone, and the dismantling is continuous. And just in the ending of the tidal zone, the beach, there are secondary cutting areas where the primary block cuts are being carried and cut to have smaller scrap. And as you can see, some of the secondary cutting areas have cemented areas are impermeable floors, but some of them are soil and permeable floor. And just to look at how this is actually look like in a photo. It looks like this. It is the same yard that we saw in the middle. And those two yards, as you can see, cemented areas in the secondary cutting, but the primary cutting is happening on the beach. And those two yards have the Hong Kong compliance. And as you can see, there is no containment, and it's very challenging to protect the environment with that kind of technique. And one of the arguments from the sector in recent years is that now the secondary cutting areas of the yards in India or in South Asia in general have impermeable floor, cemented areas. So the sector in general is more sustainable and greener. Although it can be seen as a positive development, the issue is the beaching itself, because the primary cutting is still happening on the beach. And as you can see, there are lots of materials already in the intertidal zone. And if we look at those upgraded secondary cutting areas, those are the two photos from EU inspection reports. European Commission went to India to inspect some of the upgraded Indian yards in 2019. And they found that actually the Indian yards they inspected weren't compliant with the EU ship recycling regulation. Two main points of those reasoning was that, first of all, having the primary cutting on the beach is very challenging because everything goes to the sea. And secondly, the secondary cutting areas actually don't capable to hold the wastewater, because the idea of having impermeable flooring actually to collect the waste and then treat it, but the drainage systems installed in the Indian yards were found not sufficient. And we did a short analysis with the satellite pictures. As you saw in the previous slides, you can see actually a lot from satellite pictures. And we did a analysis with their land use, and we identified the yards in the whole region which have impermeable floor. And we remarked them with purple, as you can see. More than 100 of the yards have Hong Kong compliance, and there are approximately 130 yards in India. And at larger scale, only few of them actually have impermeable flooring. And we applied that research to the whole sector to use their land use, whether it is being under control or not. And we looked at the area that they use, and we calculated basically to have a general figure. And we look at the tidal zone, secondary cutting areas, and waste storage. And we found actually only 6% of the activities in the sector are happening in a controlled manner. and the rest, basically 93%, is polluting the environment. Going to another destination, to Turkey, which is the fourth ship recycling destination after South Asia, uses landing methods. And as you can see here, it's a bit different than beaching. The ship is berthed vertically to the impermeable floors, and the cutting is happening on the impermeable floor by pulling the ship to the land. So actually, all the area is impermeable, but as Ingvild mentioned, we did a comprehensive research and published a report in last December. And one of the things we identified actually that cutting on beach or below the impermeable flooring is quite a common practice in Turkey, because sometimes the yards don't have capacity to pull the vessel, or they just would like to continue the activities in a fast way. And those are the two videos we took from workers during we did our research. And as you can see, it all goes to sea. And then another example. Yes, maybe I clicked too much, sorry. Yeah. Okay, it doesn't play. Sorry for that. Yeah. Okay, then I'll continue. So this activity, this activity was also reported in the EU inspection reports. Those are 2 yards EU listed, and the pictures are also recent from last year. As you can see, on the left, the ship is dismantled below the drainage line, so that means everything is washed to the sea because there is nothing to collect. And on the right, you see the dismantling happening on the beach. Another aspect for complete containment is spill prevention or cleanup, because ships are hazardous waste, end-of-life ships are hazardous waste, so no removal or cleanup procedure can remove the pollution. So the prevention is very important, and of course the cleanup. And according to the Basel guidelines, the spill cleanup procedures recommended to be developed within 1 year, and also spill cleanup equipment latest within 10 years. But we don't observe that as well. Unfortunately, as you can see, there's a huge spill in this picture in India, because the beaching itself creates continuous pollution, and it is very challenging to do spill prevention procedures and also cleanup. There are some other examples. As you can see, there's huge petroleum pollution from Bangladesh, and you see some other photos, recent photos as well. And coming to the water waste treatment, as I said, impermeable flooring and drainage is important basically to collect the water waste or the waste produced during the recycling activities. In Bangladesh and Pakistan, there is no waste treatment procedure. And in India, reportedly from the European Commission's site inspection reports, approximately in 2.5 days during the monsoon season, 36,000 liters will accumulate. But there is only one truck in the region which is allowed to collect all the wastewater from all the yards. That includes not only the stormwater from monsoon season, but also includes oily water, ballast water, and wastewater produced during the dismantling activities. And it has only 5,000 liter capacity. So there is no, it is not sufficient. And in Turkey, it's more or less a similar procedure, because those are two photos from Ministry of Environment's report on ship recycling yards. And on the left, you see collecting dirty water in facilities, in some sort of pits, because there is no sewage system. And after collecting those water, it is discharged to the sea without treatment. And on the right, you see discharging the ballast water to the sea, because there is no treatment system. And those photos are also from Turkey. In Turkey, there is a collection mechanism, water collection mechanism in the drainage channels of the yards. But we also observed during our interviews with workers, and also it was reported in the official domestic reports in Turkey, that those drainage channels sometimes are not capable to hold the water because they don't have environmental impact assessments, and the housekeeping of them can be challenging. And those photos basically from EU inspection reports, that practice was also identified in several yards. So there can be several problems, like as you can see in the up left, the pump wasn't working during the inspection, and the collection of the stormwater wasn't possible because the drainage channel was already full and it was floated, or in the middle, as you can see, it was already dirty, so it's not capable to hold the wastewater. And coming to the downstream waste management in the Basel Convention, and also as it is highlighted in the technical guidelines, it is one of the most important parts for having good environmentally sound management. And also in Hong Kong compliant yards, Hong Kong Convention, it is not considered, downstream waste management is not considered. There are no downstream waste management facilities in Bangladesh and Pakistan, but there are Hong Kong compliant yards. For India, there is an incineration and landfill, but there are concerns that they are not enough capacity for all type of waste streams. And another point about the downstream waste management is that asbestos is not banned in India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. So that asbestos goes into the second market in those countries. And we have a documentary about it, and we would like to show a small part of it from Bangladesh. It was published by Arte, German-French television.
অল্প কিছু ইয়ার্ড শিপইয়ার্ড, এখন 140টা শিপইয়ার্ড আছে বর্তমান রানিং। এখন ওখানে প্রতিদিনে ধরেন অমাবস্যা পূর্ণিমার জোতেই এখন আসে 7-8টা করে শিপ আসে। এগুলো হচ্ছে আপনার জার্মানি শিপ। জার্মানি একটা শিপ আসছে এদিকে মেয়রের ইয়ার্ডে, ওই ইয়ার্ড থেকে আমি এটা নিয়ে কালেকশন করি। আর এটা হলো যে ফ্রান্সের একটা জাহাজ, কারণ এই জন্য আসে এখানে তো বিভিন্ন ওয়ার্ল্ডের বিভিন্ন দেশের জাহাজ আসে, তার ভিতরে ফ্রান্সের জাহাজও আসে, জাপানি, আমেরিকানি, বিভিন্ন দেশের জাহাজ আসে। এমনি জিনিসটা একটু চুলকায়, অর্থাৎ লাগলে একটু ক্ষতি হয়, এই জন্য আমাদেরকে অ্যাপ্রন করতে হয়, সেফটি থাকতে হয়। কিন্তু জিনিসটা যদি ভালো করে এটা সাপোর্ট দেওয়া হয়, আপনার আর কোনো ক্ষতি হয় না। বয়লার স্যুট পরে তারা কাজ করে, এখানে কোনো সমস্যা হওয়ার কথা না। আর আমার এত বছর পর্যন্ত বিজনেস করতেছি, আমার কোনো প্রবলেম হয় নাই। আর যেহেতু এখানে শিপে যেসব ক্যাপ্টেন বা যারা বাস করত, যারা চলে আসছে এবং মনে করেন চলে আসার পরে যারা কাজ করতেছে, স্বাভাবিক এটা খুলতে গেলে লাগবেই।
For most workers, their protective equipment is only comprised of a scarf. a piece of fabric to cover their mouths. And that's about it. No gloves, no masks. Thousands of tons of asbestos are recovered this way each year. They're usually sent to the capital, Dhaka, to be reused in various construction sites. The fiber's properties as an insulator and fire retardant also make asbestos popular for building home ovens.
প্লাস্টার দিয়ে চুলা বানায়, তারপরে লাকড়ি দিয়ে জ্বালাইয়া ভাত রান্না করে, তরকারি রান্না করে, এইগুলা বিভিন্ন আইটেম আগুন দিয়ে জ্বালাই মানে রান্না করা যায়। এখানে লাকড়ি দিয়া একটা পাতিল এখানে বসবে আর একটা পাতিল এখানে বসবে। হ্যাঁ, এই দুটো পাতিল বসাইয়া তারপর এখান দিয়ে লাকড়ি দিয়া তারপর রান্না বান্না করবে। কিনে মানে গ্যাসের দাম বেশি, এই জন্য লাকড়ি চুলা মানে ব্যবহার করার জন্য মানে এটা কিনে আর কম দামে। মাসে 200 আর মেশিন দিয়ে কাটে বানাইলে 500 বানানো যাইব। সেল ভালো ভালো আছে, ডেলিভারি দিতে পারি না আমরা, প্রচুর মানে চাহিদা আছে। অ্যাসবেস্টাস মেশিনে পাউডার, এটা করার দিয়ে কাটলে তখন এই পাউডারটা হয়, এটার সাথে মাস্টার গাম মিক্স করে কোটিং করি, আমরা ফিনিশিং করি।
This asbestos trade isn't only dangerous to workers' health, it also represents a wider environmental issue. Next to the makeshift shops, stocks proliferate on the roadside, devoid of any warnings or protection, right in the open air, in direct contact with any passers-by. They're also found in the middle of the slums, where the destitute live because they have nowhere else to go. Thanks to the efforts of NGOs, these families are sometimes aware of the risks posed by living near asbestos.
আর বাচ্চাগুলো অসুখ তোরা গিয়ে অন্য মিকে যে এখনো মানে যে জায়গা মানুষজন বসবাস না করে ওই জায়গার লাগ দেখেন আর আমি সব এখন যেতাম গেলে আরো পাগল আনিব পুলিশ আরালে পুলিশ আনিব অত বেজ্জত করিব ফিডিব কিনে আর
Yeah, so it is indeed very tragic and definitely not in line with ESM. So just to wrap up this part, the vast majority of ships still continue to be broken under terrible conditions that do not provide environmentally sound management, and facilities that lack impermeable flooring, capacity to ensure prevent spills and proper treatment of wastewater received Hong Kong compliance. But Hong Kong compliance doesn't provide a way for environmental sound management, and it rubber stamps the standards. There are more than 100 compliant yards in India and 5 in Bangladesh. So I'll give the floor after it to David. Thanks very much.
So I can run through how the Hong Kong Convention will not guarantee environmentally sound management, as you can operate in ways that would not be allowed according to the Basel guidelines, at least. I'll talk now a bit more about what has happened since 2009 on the issue of criminal liability, because illegal traffic is a crime under the Basel Convention. And since 2009, enforcement officers, at least in Europe, have been quite active on the issue of stopping the illegal trafficking of ships. So as I said, illicit trade of end-of-life vessels is an environmental crime under the Basel Convention. It is not under the Hong Kong Convention. There are no provisions for criminalizing illegal action under Hong Kong. And a criminal act under the Basel Convention includes providing fraudulent information about the destination of the ship. This happens all the time. Ship owners will say, no, I'm not heading for scrap, I'm heading for reparations, I'm heading for further operational use. We've even seen vessels stating officially in their AIS data that they're steaming for sunshine instead of heading to the scrapping yards. This is how the shipping industry really does not care and really avoids the legislation purposefully. Another fraudulent act would be to provide false information about the hazardous materials that are contained on board the vessel. And this is also something that we have observed in Bangladesh, where we have collected through right to information a lot of the documents that are provided to customs when ships enter Bangladesh. Most of the ships enter Bangladesh with a declaration that they contain no hazardous materials, which is particularly dangerous because then there is no awareness or means or plan on how to deal with the hazardous materials in a proper way. And just here to recall a statement that was made by the European Environment Commissioner in 2005 when there was a debate in the European Parliament on this issue. He was clear that shipbreaking and end-of-life vessels are covered by European Waste Shipment Regulation, which is the Basel Convention at the EU level, and that the EU has a responsibility to deal with this issue, as many ships are originating from Europe. And he was also quite lucid that there will be attempts to avoid the legislation if it is costly to comply with. And that's what we've been seeing. But as mentioned, we've also been seeing European enforcement authorities actively bringing cases of illegal traffic to the courts. One of the first precedents was in the Netherlands with the sea trade case. There, the ship owners, 2 CEOs were banned from operating, from working in shipping, and the companies were provided heavy fines because it was revealed that they had intended to scrap the vessels in India. Other cases have been brought to the attention of ship owners. Some of them have settled. WEC Lines was one of them. But Dutch authorities have become increasingly aware of how the shipping industry avoids the legislation and have held companies accountable for it. In Scotland, you had SEPA that halted the export of 3 offshore platforms, floating platforms, that had been sold to a cash buyer. So this is also important to know. All vessels that end up in South Asia are sold via scrap dealers known as cash buyers. They're called cash buyers because they pay up front. But the business of shipbreaking in South Asia is always conducted with these middlemen. And here Diamond Offshore had sold the 3 platforms to GMS, one of the most well-known middlemen or cash buyers that operate. And they were just about to be loaded on a heavy lifting vessel before SEPA stopped it and said, no, you are not allowed to export these platforms to India. That is in breach of the EU Waste Shipment Regulation. The GMS had to find a legal destination, an OECD destination for these assets, and they were scrapped, ended up being scrapped in Turkey. Another case, which is quite well known, is the Harrier case in Norway. Here you had, it's a very burlesque case. You can read more about it on our website. It has a lot of very interesting aspects to it. But basically, it was a laid-up vessel that was sold by Eider to another cash buyer, another scrap dealer, Virana, for scrapping in Pakistan. The vessel left with false papers, saying that it was on its way to Oman for repair work and was allowed to leave, but it had motor problems on its way and it was drifting towards one of the most well-known beaches on the Norwegian west coast. There was a huge rescue action by the Norwegian Coast Guard. They had to bring the vessel in, take off the crew with a helicopter, and we alerted authorities that we believed that vessel was actually heading to South Asia for scrapping. It had changed flag, changed name, and we had received an anonymous letter in our office the year before saying that the vessel was actually being sold for scrap. Norwegian authorities arrested the vessel, boarded it, found that there were double certificates. So one certificate saying it was seaworthy to go to Oman for repair work, another saying it was seaworthy to go to Pakistan for scrapping, and it had a last voyage insurance for scrapping in Pakistan on board. So it was pretty clear to the Norwegian authorities that this vessel was not heading to Oman for repair work, but was actually being illegally exported from Norway for scrapping in Pakistan. The ship owner received 6 months prison, and that sentence was confirmed by the Norwegian Supreme Court in 2022. And the cash buyer Virana received a fine of 7 million Norwegian kroners for having also attempted to illegally export the vessel. The case also involved extended liability. So, I mean, there is not only of the exporter, but anyone who is aiding illegal traffic. And the Norwegian police brought charges against the maritime warranty surveyor and also the insurance company. Unfortunately, both were finally dropped, but it does show that there is an extended liability that is also involved in these types of illegal trafficking attempts. And there are many other ongoing investigations in the UK, in Belgium, in Iceland, in Germany, and also in Norway, with just last week, the Norwegian police issuing fines against Altera for having sold 2 assets to the same cash buyer that was involved in the Virana case, in the Harrier case, Virana for scrapping in India. And 2 summers ago, more than 100 German police officers raided the offices of German ship owners in Hamburg, and some of these cases are now being brought to court. So there's been an increased awareness since 2009 and since the Cartagena Cup in Cup 10, and enforcement authorities, at least in Europe, have been active on this and know how to identify this type of illegal trafficking. But it's not only criminal cases, but also compensation claims. And one that is worth mentioning is in the UK, where you have law firm Lide that has represented the victims of shipbreaking and an injured worker, and also the wife of a deceased worker in Bangladesh. And whilst these cases have ended up with settlements, it was established by the UK High Court that there was a very likely obligation by the UK shipowner to have a duty of care, and that that the victims were entitled to bring these cases of compensation to the UK court. The court also clearly said that a shipowner cannot hide behind having sold to a middleman scrap dealer. And they cannot hide behind clauses, contractual clauses saying that if the ship is recycled, it should be recycled in a safe way, when these clauses clearly are not reliable. And I think it's important to know that none of these cases would have been possible under the Hong Kong Convention alone. These are all cases that are based on breaches of the Basel Convention. And if you only relied on the Hong Kong Convention, you would actually be rendering the unlawful lawful. So the Basel Convention still has a role to play on this issue. And just at the European level again, what really confirms that Basel still has a role to play on the ship recycling issue is the recent revision of the EU waste shipment regulation, which actually brings back all EU-flagged vessels that become waste in EU waters under the scope of the waste shipment regulation again. There had in 2013 been the adoption of the ship recycling regulation, which is very much based on the Hong Kong Convention, though it goes beyond in many ways. It had exempted all EU-flagged ships from the waste shipment regulation. We issued a report alerting that this was troublesome. We also issued a report that criticized any attempt to avoid the Basel Ban Amendment by entering into bilateral agreements with non-OECD countries. And during the revision of the waste shipment regulation, these arguments were listened to, and ships, EU-flagged ships, are no longer exempted from the Ban Amendment. They have been brought back under the scope of the Basel Convention. And with that, I'll give the floor to David, who can talk more about the relationships between all these pieces of legislation.
Thank you very much to both of you for that quite striking report and snapshot of what the industry and what shipbreaking actually looks like all around the world today. My objective in this trying to wrap up this conversation is both to try to reaffirm and look at the legal discussion that are at the heart of the discussions that we're having now, and maybe try to look at possible ways forward and how to address the questions that are being raised. As was mentioned by both of my colleagues before, this is not really a new discussion, a new argument. Together with the shipbreaking platform, CL produced a number of legal analysis of the situation dating back to 2011, when the Hong Kong Convention started coming up, and the argument being made that, or new arguments were being made that end-of-life ships are not under the purview of the Basel Convention. As was mentioned before, this question has been settled for quite some times now. And in fact, it is a little, I want to say, almost a little depressing to have to be back here and to have to make these arguments again, because the arguments haven't really changed over the past few years. The situation, neither the legal situation and the legal arguments, nor the actual situation has changed. What has changed are renewed attempts to try to circumvene the obligation that currently exists today. So just to be clear, at the heart of the discussion here is, of course, the question of whether end-of-life ships are regulated under the Basel Convention. And as we've heard before, the answer is a resounding yes. There has been some attempts to exclude ships or to bring end-of-life ships outside of the purview of the Basel Convention, and those were rejected by the Basel parties at COP7 in 2004. And the fact that end-of-life ships are regulated under the Basel Convention means that there are obligations for Basel parties in relation to how they deal with end-of-life ships. And this conversation has seen some renewed interest since the negotiation, adoption, and soon entry into force of the Hong Kong Convention under the IMO. And we're now hearing clear voices that are articulating that because of the entry into force of the Hong Kong Convention, end-of-life ships are now being managed and should be managed according to the rules provided by this new convention. However, there are some serious legal obstacles and obstacle to that being possible. As all of you Basel Convention experts will know, Basel does not allow for a reservation and only allows for parallel, bilateral, or other multilateral agreement to enter into force to address waste that are covered by the Basel Convention under very strict conditions. And those very strict conditions are described under Article 11 of the Basel Convention. And those arguments would provide an equivalent level of control and protection than that of the Basel Convention. As we've just seen, and that was just thoroughly described and detailed by the two previous speakers, the level of control and protection afforded by the Hong Kong Convention is far from meeting the obligation under the Basel Convention. There are other major points of divergence that prevent recognizing the Hong Kong Convention as an agreement that provides an equivalent level of control. The two conventions have different goals. The Hong Kong Convention excludes certain categories of ships. There are no inspection of shipbreaking yards under the Hong Kong Convention, and there is no control on how wastes are being downstream or wastes are being addressed once they leave the shipyard. The Hong Kong Convention also allows for tacit agreement and recognition of compliance for shipyards, which the Basel Convention does not allow for sustainable management of waste facilities. And also quite clearly, as just mentioned by the last examples, the Basel Convention makes it a legal obligation for parties to criminalize illegal traffic and illegal transfer of waste that are covered by the convention, which the Hong Kong Convention does not allow and does not provide. So there is really no reasonable legal arguments that can be made apart from, well, those two conventions are relevant for end-of-life ships, which is a reality, but of course, that doesn't mean that equivalent level of control is afforded. And that argument is made even more resounding since the entry into force of the Basel Ban Amendment that strictly forbids the exports of the export of waste that are covered by the Basel Convention from OECD countries to non-OECD countries. That is not something that is subject to any source of condition depending on what will be the fate of the waste when they're exported. Regardless of what would potentially happen to those waste, the export of hazardous waste that are considered hazardous under the Basel Convention, is strictly forbidden from one to the other. The Hong Kong Convention is designed to facilitate and manage the transfer of those wastes. So there is no way to legally argue that the Hong Kong Convention provides an equivalent level of control and protection than that of the Basel Conventions. Now, one of the arguments that is being made to argue for excluding end-of-life ships from the scope of the Basel Convention and let it fall under the Hong Kong Convention is that there would be redundancy or competition, when really dual competency isn't redundancy. It is complementarity. And it is actually the way forward. There is a role to play for both the Hong Kong Convention and the Basel Convention in the operation and life cycle of ships. And this is how things should be considered right now. There is no opposition between having dual competency between those two conventions. And so in conclusion, I want to highlight a few points. First of all, because this questions, and you will see this is currently not a topic that is very high on the agenda of the Basel Convention. However, you will see that this is about to come back on the agenda, and it is very important for all parties to the Basel Convention to uphold the legal integrity of the Basel Convention, including for end-of-life ships, and refuse attempts to exclude end-of-life ships from the scope of the conventions. Another element is that there will be attempts to do or to adopt decision that would pretendly have the same types of effect from outside the purview of the Basel Convention. In fact, at the next meeting of the parties of the IMO in September, there are already suggestions and proposals on the table for the IMO to adopt resolution to acknowledge and establish an equivalence, and that aims at claiming competency, unique competency of the Hong Kong Convention over end-of-life ships. This is problematic from a legal perspective, from what we've just, from everything that we've just heard of over the past hour, but it is also highly inappropriate and legally impossible for another convention, for parties to another convention, to adopt any sorts of resolution that would have legal effect in the purview of the Basel Convention. So it's important that parties to the Basel Convention also uphold these standards in conversation that are taking place in other fora, such as the IMO. And finally, I want to maybe leave us with something that looks even beyond this particular question of which of the two convention should have priority, or how to deal, or how those two conventions can be complementary to one another, by highlighting that even with full implementation of both the Basel Convention and Hong Kong Convention in the way they're currently drafted and established, even if those were fully implemented, as we've just heard from Ingvild, there's still a number of loopholes that are left, and that would require adjusting and amending the rules that currently exist, both under the Basel Convention and the Hong Kong Convention, in particular in relation to the definition of the state of export in relation to end-of-life ships. Now, one of the specific challenge, and one of the things that makes end-of-life ships particular under the Basel Convention, is that ships are specifically designed and operated to move across border. And so the question of country of export is particularly salient and would require to be dealt with in different ways. We know of the practice of convenience flags for ships. We know of the practice of ships changing flags at the moment of end of life. And so in order to allow all the legal provisions, both the Basel and Hong Kong Convention, to show their full effect, and to allow compliance authority, police authority, and custom authority in the parties of the convention to do their work in a way that is effective, it would be particularly relevant to adjust the question of export state under both convention, to move it to this being the state of the beneficial owner, or where the beneficial owner is headquartered. And that would prevent the use of other circumventing strategies, such as the use of convenience flags and other. And that is clearly something that will be on the table and on our plate for work over the coming years under both the Basel and the Hong Kong conventions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. I'll just have some concluding remarks before we open the floor for questions. So just to recap, I mean, here we have, I use the example of 2 or 4 FSOs, oil and gas assets. These assets contain norm, mercury. I mean, this is particular to the oil and gas sector, but they have challenges. And on the top, we see 2 of these assets that ended up in Hong Kong compliant facilities in Alang. The owner of these assets received quite a lot of money for them. There was a fatal accident on one of them. And on the bottom, we see 2 assets that were recycled, one in Norway, one in Canada. And there, I mean, the one that was recycled in Norway by Shell probably had to pay at least 20 million, maybe even more, maybe the triple, for the proper recycling of their asset in Norway. Now, this is particular to these types of assets because they contain norm and mercury, which are particularly challenging and costly to deal with. But the cost difference here can not only be explained by differences in labor or that there is a higher demand for scrap steel in India. The difference in cost here is related to waste management, hazardous waste management, and the lack of it in India. And to kind of end on a more note that is maybe slightly outside of the scope of the Basel Convention, but that Basel parties should keep in mind, there is a huge number of ships that will be heading for scrap in the coming years. The numbers, everyone is expecting it to triple. So there will be a need for proper environmentally sound capacity to recycle these assets quite soon. Coupled with that is an increasing demand for good quality scrap steel. And that can be an opportunity for building up more sustainable capacity. Steel companies will need good quality scrap steel to reduce their carbon footprint and integrate more scrap steel in their production line. Already in Europe, the European steel sector is saying that the EU is going to move from a net exporter of scrap steel to a net importer of scrap steel because the demand for it is going to be very high. And the shipping industry clearly has a lot of scrap steel to offer in that sense. And so there will be a need to scale sustainable capacity for the steel sector to access this good quality scrap steel. And that capacity can be made more safe, more environmentally sound, and more cost effective by using automated technologies, full containment, etc., etc. We've published a report on our website, which is called Breaking Out, which showcases some of these technologies. And we're also organizing a conference in Lisbon, the 9th and 10th of October, to which you can register to learn more about what is being developed out there, what companies are looking into building up capacity in Brazil, in the United Arab Emirates, in Europe, and in other parts of the world. So really trying to look at solutions so that we don't see ships on tidal beaches anymore. This is our vision for what sustainable ship recycling should look like within the new concepts of a circular hub, where you look at design, scrapping, maintenance, repair. You really integrate the whole life cycle of the vessel into a circular hub. And you can also find that in the report Breaking Out. And here is a QR code to download our latest delegate alert, which we published with the Basel Action Network, outlining many of the arguments that we presented here today. Thank you for your attention. And if anyone has any questions, we're up for it. Thank you.
Good afternoon, folks. It's not a question. I just want to, first of all, my name is Dennis Dunn. I'm from Ireland. I just want to compliment all the speakers here today on a fascinating set of presentations, to be honest with you. And in particular, I think the video you shared about asbestos in Bangladesh, judging by the silence in the room which followed that video, I think It's safe to say they had a very deep impact on everyone here. I know personally I found it shocking, to be honest with you. And like I said, the silence in the room, I think, kind of confirms that. But the main point is just thank you all today for a fascinating set of presentations.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Just to thank you for the presentation and all the panelists. It was amazing. I would like to know if this material will be made available in the website, the presentations, the PowerPoints.
They will be published on the webpage of this event as soon as we finish, and the video is already available.
Okay, and the documentary, the name of it?
The link will be included on the page.
Okay, thank you so much.
And it's embedded in the video of the event. So.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions in the room? So as Dan mentioned, this event was also being streamed online, and we have one question from an online participant. Let's see who can answer that one from us. But the question is saying that the Basel Convention is obviously being there are loopholes and it's being circumvented. But the Hong Kong Convention will enter into force soon in June 2025. Do you understand that this problem will be solved by the entry into force of the Hong Kong Convention? And David, if you want to answer that.
Sure, thanks very much. I think the short and straightforward answer is no, quite the opposite. As I've tried to articulate earlier, while there are some gaps in the Basel Convention, it's still extremely useful and still extremely important to ensure the safe, environmentally sound end of life of ships. And what we're seeing, and the Hong Kong Convention, while it can provide some support in better design maybe of the ships and better management of the operating life of the ships, none of the provisions of the Hong Kong Convention will address the loopholes or the gaps that currently exist in the Basel Convention. Quite the contrary, it actually weakens the controls that are being put in place. And so with the attempts that we're seeing to have the Hong Kong Convention supersede the Basel Convention and even replace the Basel Convention, rather than solving all the problem, it may actually make the situation and the conditions in shipyards and for end-of-life ship recycling even much worse than they currently are.
So maybe to add to that comment, the Hong Kong Convention asks flag states to implement the regulation. And we have been looking at the types of flag states that are used for end-of-life vessels. And there are certain flags that are particularly popular. There is Palau, I think it's St. Nevis. These are grey and blacklisted flags by port authorities because they are known to poorly implement maritime legislation. And they're being used for the last voyage. They're being used by the scrap dealers, the cash buyers, who are extended arms of the beaching facilities. So, I mean, I think it's pretty naive to think that these flag states will be implementing the Hong Kong Convention in a strict manner. Say the convention were to be amended to have stricter requirements, for example. There is a serious problem in the parties that are being asked to implement it as well.
Hello, Ingvild. Thanks so much to the panel for a really sort of fascinating, if somewhat depressing, presentation. Do you think there's a role for the flag state authorities, particularly in places like in the developed world, to take more care in where the flag states are moving to? You mentioned that there's flags of convenience. Well, those flags of flag states of convenience can only take on those vessels if they're released by their original flag authority. So is there a role for those original flag authorities to do more due diligence checks before they are reflagged to flags of convenience? Thank you.
That could potentially be a way forward, but I think we already see that during operational life, there are also flags of convenience being used, such as Panama, Marshall Islands, Liberia, which are the largest flag states. So some of the vessels operating under these flags will be very fine, but they are also known to maybe close their eyes to certain issues. But I think the Harrier case, which I mentioned, also shows that, I mean, when the vessel was arrested, it was sailing under the flag of Comoros. And the Norwegian Coast Guard called the registry of Comoros. But the Comoros registry said, no, we don't have this vessel in our registry. So the cash buyers quickly changed the flag to Palau. But I think the case shows that there might even be a risk that we have end-of-life vessels sailing with no flag to the scrapping destinations. So, and there are some figures that are important to keep in mind. I mean, the EU controls 40% of the world fleet. So companies headquartered in the European Union control 40% of the world fleet. Only 17% of the world fleet actually sails under an EU flag. And at end of life, it's only 5%. And those 5% are already being scrapped in the EU. So for us, flag state jurisdiction is not the most reliable and appropriate jurisdiction. I will echo David's recommendations to look into beneficial owner.
Thank you, Ivo from the Netherlands, and thank you for this very interesting presentation. I have a question, maybe a bit too detailed and too specific, but we still have more than 10 minutes. So I was wondering, the Dutch court cases, what was the legal basis for their rulings? In this, was it European legislation? Was it Hong Kong? No, but not Hong Kong, but was it Basel or anything? Can you elaborate a bit on that?
So in all cases I mentioned, it was the EU waste shipment regulation, which is the implementation of the Basel Convention at the EU level. And it was the ban, so the ban on exporting hazardous waste from the EU to a non-Annex 7 country. Yeah. Any other questions from the floor? Yeah.
Hi, thanks so much for the insightful sharing. Just now I heard, David, you mentioned that there are some difficulties in clarifying the state of export for PIC notifications for ships bound for shipbreaking. So for ships that are en route to shipbreaking, they would pass through countries, different states of different countries to transit for cleaning and so forth. So just wanted to get your take for export of for PIC notifications from state of export. Would the state of export be the flag state, the state where the vessel or the FSO is operating in, or the last port of call? What's your view on this? Thanks.
Thank you. And just to clarify your question, are you asking which it should be for best possible implementation, or how it is currently being implemented?
Best possible implementation, and also for better accountability of the waste. Maybe just to share, I'm from Singapore. So as you know, Singapore is a very busy transit hub. We have ships coming in and out, and sometimes we don't know where. We have heard of cases where the ships could be bound for shipbreaking, but we could be their last port of call. So just wanted to find out like what are the implications to a busy transit hub like Singapore if we were actually the last port of call before the final shipbreaking? Yeah.
Thanks. And I think what the point that you're putting your finger on is exactly why we believe that implementing current rules about state of export actually shouldn't apply to ships, or makes the implementation of regulation particularly difficult for ships that are designed to move around and to stop in different calls to identify that that export countries for PIC. And this is why we believe that conventions should be amended to recognize that to give the status of export state to the state that is where the beneficial owner is headquartered. As Ingvild just mentioned, the EU or EU-based companies, corporation, control about 40% of the fleet that is navigating around the world, and it would make the most sense, and it would be the most efficient in terms of implementation and compliance with existing regulation if the responsibility and accountability was put on those countries where the beneficial owners is headquarters. So this is a sort of reform that we are advocating for to actually address some of the issue that you raise as one of the issue with Singapore. But I don't know if some of my colleagues wanted to add anything to this.
Any other questions? No? Then I think we can end early, but yeah. Thank you very much for participating. Thank you also online for participating. I mean, we remain available for any questions you may have, any clarifications, etc., and we'll be continuing to advocate for safe and environmentally sound ship recycling. Thank you.
And I also want to thank Jen.
Yeah.
I just also, I'm sorry, just to thank the Geneva Environment Network for the support that they've provided in the organization and screening and broadcasting of this event. So thank you very much to all of the Gen team as well.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. And this said, we look forward to see you at 2 other upcoming events, one this evening in room B, where we will be presenting a recent report that we have already discussed within the Geneva Big Plastic Pollution Dialogues. And then tomorrow in room B also, where we will be discussing pharmaceutical waste. So we look forward to see you at those 2 other side events that we will be supporting this week. Thank you.